All right, we are live. Hello, everybody. Day 4 of the conference. We are, as usual, going to wait just 90 seconds and get started. You're here with Matt, Daniel, and Ichu, who are excited to share their work. And just 90 seconds after the hour, we will get started.
Excellent. It's the big Friday night slot. Position of honor.
Right. I am rocking the Animalia Pangolin hat. You guys can see that. We're giving these away in the Instagram trivia. I'm also rocking this because I have quarantine hair. I cannot get a haircut, and it looks ridiculous. Although I think it's coming out of the side so much, it looks even more ridiculous with that.
It's kind of like the old Bozo the Clown look. You have these like wings coming out.
Yeah, I sort of feel like a clown with his haircut. All right, so I'll kick things off just to let everybody know where we're at. Then I'm going to jump off and turn it over to Matt, Ichu, and Daniel, and I'll come back on and join them for the Q&A. But just so everybody knows, we're in day 4 here, our 4th session. Excited to share this with you guys. We're going to talk. They're going to talk a lot more about what's going on in West Africa, a lot of the field work that they do, a lot about pangolin habitats, and some of the on-the-ground tracking they're doing with wild pangolins. So on day 1, you got to hear the overview from Paul, kind of Pangolin 101, and then the connection with COVID and kind of trafficking with Rachel. Day 2, we got to see Pangolin Rehabilitation Center in Singapore and meet our wild pangolin with Ade. Day 3, Christina and Hong presented all their work they're doing to change culture. And then now we're going to dive into some of the work that's going to happen in the field, in the wild, with Matt, Daniel, and Ichu. So don't forget, right after this session, we have our Pangolin Happy Hour where everybody gets to meet each other, kind of like speed networking for 5 minutes. Some of our speakers will be there as well. Should be a lot of fun. And with that, I will turn it over for Daniel, Ichu, and Matt to introduce themselves, and I'll see you guys for the Q&A.
Great. Thanks, James. So cool. Before we get started, I just want to give a thanks out to James and the MLA team, and of course the Pangolin Crisis Fund and Paul and his team for organizing this and inviting us to participate. We're very excited to be here. So as James mentioned, my name is Matt Shirley. I'm a conservation biologist, conservation scientist with the Institute of Environment at Florida International University. I've only been studying pangolins for a couple of years. I've been working in West and Central Africa for almost 20 years now, mostly on crocodiles and other kind of weird species that are off the beaten path. And, fortunately for me, because pangolins are scaly, I don't really consider it cheating on my first love. So it's really when I first fell in love with pangolins, it was when the late 1990s when I was flipping through those books, getting ready for my first trips to Africa, and I came across the pictures of pangolins in the field guide and said, "What the bloody hell is that? I have to see one." And of course, it wasn't for another 20 years that I actually found one in the wild. But from that first encounter, how can you not love them? And so tonight, I'm joined by Ichu Godwill from Cameroon and Daniel Konzin from Ghana. Both Ichu and Dan are currently pursuing their master's studies on different aspects of pangolin ecology and pangolin conservation. Ichu was formerly a Mentor Pop fellow. Mentor Pop was the ZSL U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service program that was sought to build capacity in young African researchers looking to facilitate pangolin conservation in the region. Daniel is the assistant warden, one of the assistant wardens for Kakum National Park in Ghana, which is really famous because it's one of the only parks in Africa that has a canopy walkway. We're really excited to hear their stories. But before we begin, Ichu, I really want to know, why do you love pangolins?
Okay, thank you, Matt. I think pangolins are extraordinary species. For example, they are the only scaly mammals in the world. And conducting research on pangolins has provided me with the opportunity to actually have a better understanding about how the ecosystem functions, the relationship between the society and nature, and how dependent we really are on nature. So I think it's really a great opportunity for me.
That's great. What about you, Daniel? What is it that you love about pangolins?
They are really tiny and easily picked by people. So I love them. I love them looking at the way they are and other things. So.
Excellent. Excellent. All right, guys. So, tonight the three of us are going to talk about the work that we're doing, unraveling some of the mysteries of West Africa's pangolins. West Africa's pangolins are generally the most understudied species in the world. You know very little about them. And so I want to start you off with a brief video. What you're seeing here is a black-bellied pangolin moving through his canopy habitat. We were able to capture this footage by virtue of an animal-borne camera. So this is a camera that's actually attached to the pangolin's back. It allows us to see what the pangolin sees and experience the habitat he's experiencing. I love this part. I love that crazy flicking tongue as he's going out. He's going for his preferred prey. He's going nuts on his ants. So, pangolins are very challenging animals to study, and I hope this video kind of gave you a bit of a perspective on that. They're largely arboreal. They spend a lot of time in the trees, depending on the species we're talking about. And even when they're not in the trees, they spend a lot of time in very densely vegetated areas. One second, Daniel, I think I'm going to ask you and Ichu to put the microphones on mute for half a second. Cool. They're very small. They're very hard to come across. And a lot of the work that Ichu and Daniel and myself are doing is aimed at really uncovering what these animals are doing on a day-to-day basis so we can figure out how to use that information to better protect and manage these species. In West Africa, we have 3 different pangolin species. For example, the white-bellied pangolin, which you see here on the left, the black-bellied pangolin on the right. These two are the smallest pangolin species in the world. They average about 2 kilograms. It's almost 5 pounds or less as adults. They're quite morphologically distinct. The white-bellied pangolins, of course, have white bellies, white fur, light-colored scales. Black-bellied pangolins have that dark fur, dark skin, and really beautiful two-toned kind of brown moving into orange scales. White-bellied pangolins are nocturnal mostly. Black-bellied pangolins are almost entirely diurnal. Black-bellied pangolins are almost exclusively arboreal, which means they live up in the trees and they almost never come down. But we've learned that they can swim, which is crazy, and they do walk on the ground occasionally. White-bellied pangolins spend a lot more time foraging on the ground. And of course, our third, recently they've been evaluated under the criteria for the IUCN Red List. White-bellied pangolins are endangered and black-bellied pangolins are vulnerable. This is all their risk of extinction, and I'll talk about why that is in a moment. The third pangolin species we have in West and Central Africa is, of course, the giant pangolin. This species is exclusively terrestrial and it's huge. It's currently regarded as endangered. And just to put this in perspective, this is a giant pangolin that was captured by our colleagues and friends at the Chester Zoo over in Uganda. This animal was almost 40 kilograms, if I remember correctly. It took these 5 adult men to hold this thing down in order to attach a transmitter. And every time this animal wanted to get up and go, it was basically dragging them across the forest floor. In comparison, this is a black-bellied pangolin that fits casually in the palm of my hand. They're really small, delicate species. You can see the way that they curl up as a defense mechanism, which makes them all too easy to hunt for humans, even though that's a perfect defense mechanism against natural predators. In West Africa, like I said, we have 3 species of pangolin, the white-bellied, black-bellied, and giant. But in Africa, we have 4 species in total, including the Temminck's ground pangolin. The distributions, as you can see from this map, of white-bellied, black-bellied, and giants are largely almost 100% overlapping. White-bellied is a bit more widely distributed than the other 2 species. And within West Africa, I principally work in Cote d'Ivoire, even though I have programs in some other countries. Daniel is from Ghana, of course, and Ichu is from Cameroon. And so these 3 countries are right in the core range of these species, and they're ideal study sites. And also because of kind of differences in their conservation history and management, let's say natural resources management history. And, Pangolins in West Africa are threatened, or West and Central Africa. I mean, globally they're threatened, of course. And a lot of people put a lot of emphasis on the illegal wildlife trade, the trafficking of pangolin scales, and things like that. But of course, habitat loss is one of the main things that threatens pangolins in our region. So this is a map of West Africa, like the Upper Guinea forest. And so everything that's in color here, except for the blue and the gray, used to be forest cover. The dark green is still forest, and the red was forest that's entirely lost. Everything that's in a lighter color of green is kind of like fragmented and degraded forest. We estimate that West Africa has lost over 90% of its forest cover, which of course is really bad for forest-dwelling species. And black-bellied pangolins in particular, giant pangolins and white-bellied pangolins, they really kind of need that forest cover. And so, when we're thinking about threats to pangolins, as we're losing forest, we're losing animals. Actually, Ichu, I'm really curious, for example, you come from Central Africa, so Cameroon's a Central African country. Is this situation different over there? And don't forget to unmute your microphone.
Okay, I think the situation could be similar. I'm not too sure about the intensity, but what's common in Cameroon is that when you leave a particular rural area to the city for, let's say, 5 to 10 years over a period of time, upon returning, it's very common to find out that some of the areas that used to be covered by forests has been converted to other land use, including new buildings, construction of roads, dams, and new plantations. Some of these forests are actually important habitat for wildlife species, including the pangolin. So I think in Cameroon, it's similar, but I'm not quite sure about the intensity, if it's the same.
Yeah, typically we think that Central Africa still has a lot more forest cover than West Africa, but it's definitely an ongoing threat. And I'm going to apologize in advance. We seem to have lost Daniel. He's joining us from Ghana, actually by a cellular internet connection. So hopefully he's able to join us again in a little bit, and we'll incorporate him back into the talk. Oh, and there he is. Aside from forest, from habitat loss, pangolins in West Africa are threatened by the bushmeat trade and consumption. Since the beginning of time, pangolins have been a really desired bushmeat species. They're eaten in stew, they're eaten smoked, and in all kinds of ways. And this local consumption, it might be sustainable, it might not, we don't know. But combined with habitat loss and combined with illegal wildlife trade, it's clearly contributing to the decimation of pangolin populations. Actually, so Daniel, I'm really curious. You told me previously that you've eaten pangolin. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, I think the last time I ate pangolin was 2005. My father used to bring them home because we were having farms around. So anytime he's coming back to the house, he comes back with a pangolin. And he usually encounters them in the bushes, not really in the forest, but in the bushes.
All right.
Yeah.
So he's not really a pangolin hunter. It's kind of opportunistic. And, back 15 years ago is when you kind of ate your last pangolin. Ichu, you've never eaten a pangolin, is that right? Microphone.
Okay, actually, where I grew up, bushmeat was really scarce, and even when it was available, it's always more expensive than other protein sources. So I really did not grow up eating bushmeat, and when I was in the university, I actually studied environmental sciences, so I was a bit more conscious about the things happening to the environment. But what I can recall is that when I first told my mom that I was working on pangolin conservation, he actually told me a story when a particular day when my grandfather actually brought home a pangolin and asked her to prepare when she was still very young. So I really think that it used to occur in our area. Now it's just more difficult to find, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I imagine the populations are declining and they're much harder to find. I have never eaten a pangolin, for better or worse. And recently I did a survey of stakeholders, pangolin conservation stakeholders in West Africa, about what they think population abundance is for pangolins. And so, this is a graph that shows on the vertical axis population trends. So as we move up, we're increasing in population, down, we're decreasing in population. And from left to right, the species is abundant or more increasingly abundant. And what we found is that most range states felt as though their pangolin populations were were in decline and not very abundant, but that this trend was different for different species and in different places. And so, for example, for white-bellied pangolins, this seems to be the most abundant species. And in places like Gabon, DR Congo, Cameroon, and Liberia, these are all places that still have really good forest cover. They think that the populations might still be relatively abundant, even though they're decreasing because of the threat of trade. But black-bellied pangolins and giant pangolins, the situation seems to be quite different. Black-bellied pangolins are very rarely encountered. by people. They live up in the canopies, so maybe this is an artifact of their ecology. Maybe it's an artifact of the fact that they're just really low abundant species to begin with. And giant pangolins are, because they're ground dwelling, they live in the burrows, they're much easier to hunt, and people really feel, no matter where you are in the distribution, that they're being hammered. But notice really that this difference in abundance and availability of habitat seems to be really making a difference. So aside from these more direct threats, one of the major problems we're encountering with pangolins in West and Central Africa is that there are significant data gaps. And these data gaps, this knowledge about pangolins in general, their ecology, their biology, is really hindering our capacity to implement management programs for them, conservation programs. And this is where Daniel, Ichu, and myself come in. So what we want to talk about for the remainder of the night, more or less, is kind of how we approach studying pangolins and some of the things that we're learning. And so one of the first things that we do when we're talking about a species that's really difficult to find and we don't really know where it is or much about it to begin with is we start talking with local communities. So traditional ecological knowledge and the knowledge that's shared by local people who have been living in these habitats with these species for ages is a really good place to start. And Ichu, this is something that you have been working on for the past several years. I'm curious, what has been your experience interacting with local community members?
Okay, when we actually first started, we did not have much knowledge about pangolins, where we can find them, how we can find them. So the first step, we had to try to talk to the local communities who have been interacting with the pangolins for a very long period of time. So we actually try to combine traditional ecological knowledge with more scientific knowledge. So the local community members actually help us in deciding where we are going to place our camera traps, because we actually started work using camera trapping. So with their knowledge, they actually directed us how to set our camera traps to be able to have a pangolin detection. So I think traditional ecological knowledge has been very helpful throughout our research, even up to today.
Yeah, exactly. And in our experience in Côte d'Ivoire, for example, you go and you meet these local communities and, you're trying to convince them to work with you, support your efforts. You're going to work with them and support their efforts for sustainable natural resources. And it's really kind of a team effort. And also it's a good way to get to know the people, get to know the cultures and traditions. It's really amazing working with local people. Of course, there are limitations to that. So once we've kind of talked to local people and we have an idea about, okay, pangolins are here, we're going to go look for them in the forest. One of the things that we can do are daytime recce walks. These are kind of exploratory walks in the forest, or we can do actual systematic and structured surveys, which have us walking on, direct, straight 1 or 2 kilometer line transects looking for pangolins. Oftentimes this happens during the day. Unfortunately, if we're looking for pangolins, there's only one completely diurnal pangolin species in West Africa that's black-bellied, and so of course we have to assume we're missing lots of other individuals from the other 2 species. But if we're not looking for pangolins themselves, one thing that we can do is look for pangolin sign. And so, for example, this is a feeding spot for a pangolin. He was ripping into the bottom of this dead wood, looking for termites and ants. And other signs might include, for example, these like scrape marks on the trees where their claws are going. It takes a keen eye to see these things. It really does. And so, Daniel, you've done a lot of walking through the forest in Kakum National Park in particular, looking for pangolins. Have you ever actually found a pangolin on any of your transect walks, or have you seen a wild pangolin? Don't forget your microphone. And I'm going to warn the audience listening, I think there might be a little bit of a delay because of the connection in Ghana tonight. Yeah, we can hear you.
So I've seen 2 species. I've seen 2. Yeah, I've seen 2. One in the day and one in the night. And I think it happened in 2017. But recently, I've surveyed 20 transects and I've never encountered any. But let me say, it is very difficult walking in the night surveying for pangolins. It's very, very, very difficult. And none of my night surveys, I didn't encounter any pangolins. So it's really, really difficult.
So what is the challenge for you working at night looking for white-bellied and giant pangolins in the forest?
Shoot.
All right, guys. There seems to be a bit of a communication issue in Daniel's side. Dan, I'm going to ask you to shut off your microphone. And Ichu, I'm going to ask you: have you actually seen a wild pangolin yet in any of your survey efforts?
I think I have not been very fortunate to actually see a live pangolin in the field for the time that I've been in the field. So because we mostly work during the day, and as we know, most of the species are nocturnal, so I haven't been that lucky. But actually, there are other researchers who have been lucky to find pangolins. Like I actually met a researcher who's working on chimpanzees, who had actually seen a pangolin. I had photographs of pangolin that he took in the field. So I'm just hoping that maybe the next time I go to the field, I pray I'll be lucky.
Exactly. It's always that way. You want to see them and you never do, and somebody else doesn't even care, doesn't even know they're there, and they see them. And so, but what is the issue for you? So for you guys that don't know, the big issue for Daniel working at night in Ghana has to do with incursion into the forest and poachers. And last year, the Ghana Wildlife Division actually had a poacher shot, or a ranger shot by a poacher in the forest at night. And that's a really challenging situation to deal with. But in Central Africa, they have that same issue. But there's another major problem that you guys are confronted with. Ichu, what is that?
I think for us in Cameroon, for example, the presence of species like the elephant makes it a bit risky for us to be able to work in the night. So even though we attempted that, we actually walked about 6 kilometers. We didn't find any pangolin, and it was really risky. And so many times, we are always advised by the park service not to work in the night. So it's a bit risky for us. So for the moment, we are not really working much on night walks.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, safety concerns with elephants are no joke. They're really challenging in the forest. And so, night walks are a problem, which means we're automatically missing a couple of species on recce walks and transects, and looking for sign is a challenge. Just to give you guys an idea, so these are the patrol walks, records of the patrol walks that the Ghana Wildlife Division park staff in Kakum National Park have walked since 2016, 17, and 18. So every year they average almost 6,000 kilometers a year, but they've only ever found a maximum of 60 pangolins, like on accident. I mean, so this is a huge amount of effort. This is a huge amount of man hours and man days in the forest for very, very little return. And it's very difficult to estimate abundance on this. And so based on these records, we're estimating an abundance of maybe 0.01 pangolins per kilometer. So that would take about 100 kilometers of walking before you come across a single pangolin. And in Côte d'Ivoire, we're finding slightly higher abundances. So about 1.3 black-bellied pangolins per hectare, or about a half of a white-bellied pangolin per hectare. For those Americans that are listening to this, what is a hectare? A football field, an American football field, is about a half of a hectare. So what does that mean? We would need about 4 football fields of contiguous forest habitat to support a single white-bellied pangolin. White-bellied pangolins are really small. They're about the size of a medium-sized house cat, and they're up in the trees. They're in burrows. They're in tree cavities. They're running around. I mean, that's like finding a needle in a haystack. And so clearly we need to start thinking about alternative methods for finding pangolins, surveying their abundance, and monitoring their populations. One of those means is through camera traps. Camera traps, or game cameras, are these cameras that we can leave in remote habitat situations and program them to take pictures of animals as they walk past or at certain time intervals. Camera traps are used regularly for monitoring grade 8 populations, tigers, elephants, everything you can possibly think about. And so, last year, Ichu and myself and a bunch of other authors participated in an analysis where we assessed the power of camera traps set up to monitor species like elephants and apes to detect pangolins. And what we found is it's not very effective. The camera traps are set at knee height or mid-thigh height to get good face shots of pangolins or side, tiger stripes, that sort of thing. And so maybe pangolins are walking underneath. Maybe they're either walking too fast or too slow to trigger the sensors. We just don't know. But on top of that, it seemed to require a lot of effort, maybe 3,000 to 5,000 camera trap days worth of effort in the forest to really even get a picture of a pangolin. But Ichu mentioned earlier that when you were talking to, for example, your local community members, that they were able to identify for you what is a definitive pangolin sign in the forest, right?
Yes, actually, in our own camera trapping effort, we combine just the scientific method with the traditional ecological knowledge. So we do some sort of microsighting. That is, we actually establish the camera traps in areas where we have the greater chance of having pangolin detection. Some of this, so we target like pangolin signs, including feeding remains, burrows, termite mounds, and dirt and fallen logs, for example. And in the work that we did in 2018, we actually had, for using about 15 cameras, over a period of 2 months, we had up to 54 pangolin detections. So we think actually targeting this pangolin sign of microsighting gives us a better chance of having pangolin detections.
Okay, good. So, we're learning things from local people. We're putting cameras in the forest, and we're starting to learn more things about pangolins. Just this map on the left, that's also Kakum National Park, and in Ghana, and the green dots are places where Daniel has gotten camera trap photos of pangolins in the park, and the red dots are cameras that never photographed a pangolin. And so we can still see, even if we're improving our capture rates with targeted camera trapping, it's not many records at all. We're still, we can still learn a lot from camera traps. So for example, on the picture on the left, it's really hard to see, I know, but inside that little red circle is a white-bellied pangolin out at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So I told everyone in the beginning of this talk that white-bellied pangolins were mostly nocturnal, which means they live during the day. So what is this guy doing out in the middle of the afternoon? We don't know yet, but we're learning, and we're trying to figure that out as we go along. But in Daniel's study, when I kind of made this slide a while ago, after almost 600 camera trap days, it only had one detection. That's fortunately since increased, but this is now after almost like 1,000 days. In Cote d'Ivoire, we're targeting camera traps on giant pangolin burrows. We've done this for over 700 days now, and we haven't gotten any detections. And that could be because giant pangolins have a much bigger home range and a lot lower frequency of revisits to burrow sites. It could be that these particular animals were already hunted. We don't actually know. But from other work, so the guys at Chester Zoo, for example, in DR Congo and Uganda, they're finding that it takes about 3,000 to 5,000 camera trap days to even photograph a single giant pangolin. And that's a very low return for your effort. So what are some other solutions to this? How do we get to know more about the pangolins in general to maybe plug in some of these knowledge gaps and increase our targeted monitoring? I'm going to show another quick video here.
Et nous avons trouvé un nouvel individu de pangolin qui n'est pas encore bagué. Les écailles sont faites à base de kératine. Il n'y a pas de nerfs. Donc, en perçant, il n'y a même pas de risque de blesser ou faire du mal au pangolin.
Ça, c'est lequel? Cool. So that video is the start of the documentary, or short documentary, that our collaborators at Coral and Oak Studios, who you guys are going to hear from later in the weekend, made with us in Cote d'Ivoire on capturing pangolins, attaching the Pango Cam. But you can also see how we were attaching other devices. So these are GPS radios, for example, and data loggers, which we'll talk about in half a second. From the Pango Cam video itself, we're able to actually annotate behaviors, so figure out when the pangolins are moving, when they're drinking, when they're eating, when they're sleeping. We're able to identify the vegetation, so the types of tree species that they're living on, the types of ants that they're foraging on, and kind of develop behavior profiles. All this is in the process of being analyzed right now, so I can't really talk about it, but I just wanted to show what the beginnings of a pangolin ethogram or kind of behavior profile looks like. So with radio telemetry or other telemetry devices, we're able to attach a small device to the pangolin and relocate it over and over and over again to basically follow its movements, get an idea for how much space it needs, get an idea for the resources that it's actually using. And so in this photo on the right, we can actually see a white-bellied pangolin with a VHF transmitter. And then that photo on the left is the very first ever black-bellied pangolin that we captured for transmitter attachment, and which makes it the very first ever black-bellied pangolin in the world to be tagged with a transmitter. And personally, I'm very excited about this animal because it was me that found it in the forest, and not my former pangolin hunter field research assistant who was claiming the entire week he was the man pangolin spotter. So I was very happy about it. It's a very beautiful animal. We were very excited to get that guy out there. And since then, we've been able to get about 20 or 25 tags on both white-bellied and black-bellied pangolins and follow their movements through the forest. So this is an image that illustrates black-bellied pangolins that are being followed in the forest by our friends at the Senga Pangolin Project in Central African Republic. So this is a slightly different approach. These guys, they have Baka forest peoples following their animals every day, observing them, notating their behavior, and taking notes about where they're sleeping and waking up. And so every blue dot there is a daily location, a relocation for the animals that they're following. What we're finding is that black-bellied pangolins occupy a really small amount of space. So the furthest distance between those two most distant blue dots is only about 1 kilometer. That's only about 35 or 40 hectares worth of space. And in Cote d'Ivoire, we're finding that the animals are using a lot less space. And this little animated GIF that you see on the right is kind of the daily movements. So these animals are moving only maybe 100 or 200 meters a day at most. They're very slow in the forest, but it also maybe means that their resource needs can be met in very, very small areas. And that's very helpful when we think about, for example, conceptualizing future protected area design for pangolins. Another device that we're attaching to these animals are these data loggers. So these data loggers measure the microclimate around the animal, both temperature and light. And so, for example, on the right, all the blue dots correspond to a data logger that we put out in an open area. So it's getting a bunch of access, open sunlight directly onto the device. And the yellow dots are all the light exposure to the data logger on the pangolin. So what we're learning, of course, is the penguin's not coming out of the open very often. It's kind of preferring these really kind of densely vegetated, concealed areas for protection from predators and human poachers, for example. And one kind of really cool use of this would be for giant pangolins, for example. If we can get one of these onto a giant pangolin, anytime that the giant pangolin is in their burrows, well, the light is going to go down to 0, and the temperature, of course, is going to be radically different from that in the surrounding forest. And so even if we lose the pangolin on a VHF or a GPS tracker, for example, we can still reconstruct its behaviors as it's coming in and out of burrows, as it's walking around the forest, how much time is it spending out in the day versus at night, that kind of thing. We're able to get a better understanding for the habitat use of these species. So which vegetation, like which tree species they're principally using and why. So this palm on the left and this fruiting tree on the right really seem to support a lot of ant colonies, arboreal ant colonies, which seems to be why they're preferring them. But both of these tree species will give off different signatures in remotely sensed data, for example. And so if we know what species of vegetation pangolins are principally using, we might be able to use remote sense technology to better map where pangolins are showing up or where we need to be looking for more pangolins and where we need to be protecting habitat. And so that's some hopefully this information is going to be informing those efforts as we move forward. You guys are probably aware that pangolins are ant and termite specialists. So these observations as we're following the animals around with transmitters are helping us better understand exactly which ants and termites they're predating on. And so these forest leaf nest weaver ants are really kind of the preferred food source of black-bellied pangolins. But of course, we're only able to observe them for about a half an hour a day. And so one of the other means that we can use to reconstruct diet is through stomach content or fecal content analysis. And so on the right, you can see Daniel has got this big handful of stomach contents. The stomach he was able to get from a bushmeat vendor. The mama selling this pangolin knew he was a student, kind of took pity on him and gave him the stomach. He's able to open it up, pull the stomach contents out, and actually sit there poring over a microscope, learning what species of ants and termites the pangolins are eating. This is really problematic for several reasons. One, you can see the size of this ant that he's looking at through the microscope. It's really tiny. Seeing the morphological features necessary to identify these animals is really challenging. And then, of course, in West and Central Africa, there's virtually but there's very few references compared to, for example, North America or Europe or Central and South America for the ant and termite fauna. And so we're having to look for other means to identify the prey, either through, for example, DNA, genetic barcoding, or something else. But it's challenging. In any case, as we're better understanding the prey species that pangolins are eating, this is also providing us some really key information for ex situ management of pangolins. So ex situ, of course, being captive animals outside of their natural environment. More and more live pangolins are being confiscated from the bushmeat trade live. And when that happens by a rescue operation, they bring them into captivity for a certain amount of time, get them back up to health, and release them back into the wild. Well, if we know more about what they eat, we know more about what we can feed them in the wild, or in captivity, which is really, really convenient. Unfortunately, our GPS transmitters are really quite limited in range. So, for example, we can only get about 200-300 meters, and that has to really do with the habitat. So one other thing that we're working on is developing GPS transmitters that use LoRa, so this long-range radio frequency signals to transmit data. And so this is us testing our device with one of our engineers who lives in Romania. And what we're finding is that in the middle of a city, kind of in this mountain valley area, we're getting about 30 kilometers of transmission distance, which is huge compared to 200 to 300 meters. It means we might be able to deploy this GPS on an animal, which means we're automatically getting more data because we don't actually have to find the animal in the forest to take a GPS location. The actual device does that for us. And then we can be 10 or 20 kilometers away with our receiver and download the data automatically. We've gotten to the stage where we've engineered a tag that's a little bit bigger for giant pangolins and ground pangolins, and a smaller tag that's for black-bellied and white-bellied pangolins. And we were supposed to be in the field testing these technologies out in the first couple months of this year. Unfortunately, like many things, we've been delayed. So hopefully we'll have some really exciting results on that soon. And the other good thing is that, GPS transmitters typically cost between $1,000 and $3,000. We've got the engineering down to these, so they only cost about $200 to $250. So they're a lot more accessible to a lot more programs around the world, which is really exciting. And of course, the more that we're getting hands-on pangolins, the more that we're able to benefit from this opportunity to understand the basic biology. So we can take blood samples, we can take urine samples, we can figure out what a normal, healthy pangolin in the wild is supposed to look like. And that will, again, improve our care of these animals in captivity, whether it's short-term or long-term. And this is a project that we are in particular partnering with Chicago Brookfield Zoo on. We're starting to get some samples collected and sent in for analysis. So unfortunately, again, no results, but check back in. We'll have that soon. So these are some of the efforts that we're undertaking to better understand pangolins in the wild. What I want to do right now is switch back to this wildlife trafficking component. Illegal wildlife trafficking is a major problem, conservation issue for pangolins, especially out of Africa, Central and West Africa. There's a huge illicit trade in pangolin scales. For example, on the left, this is about 2.1 metric tons of scales that are seized in Cote d'Ivoire. And on the right, this is a nearly 12-ton seizure in Singapore. That came from Nigeria. I think that's the last kind of shipping information. We don't really know where the scales came from. And so one of the things that we're trying to better understand is what is the actual impact of this trade on species. And to understand that, we really need to understand how to convert these massive scale seizures into numbers of pangolins. And so in Cote d'Ivoire, what we've been able to do is go into bushmeat markets, get black-bellied and white-bellied pangolins, kind of deconstruct them in terms of scales. We're able to study the scale morphology. We're able to weigh and measure these scales. We're able to compare between the species and figure out how to identify them. So, for example, on the right, that picture on the bottom of my hand is a white-bellied pangolin scale. The picture in the middle of my hand is a black-bellied pangolin scale. On the top of my hand and my fingers is a giant pangolin scale. And so with this increasing information, we're now confident that we're able to identify the scales. For example, if we were just to scoop a handful out of those bags, we're able to see that, for example, despite the fact that the shoulder scales of white-bellied and black-bellied pangolins, they might look similar, there are some morphological differences, there's some color differentiation, and we're able to use that information to now identify species in trade. Of course, giant pangolin scales, they're totally different. I mean, these things are big, they're hard, they're not flexible, they weigh a ton, there's no confusing them whatsoever. And so with this seizure, the series of seizures that happened in Cote d'Ivoire, I rallied about 10 graduate students, I'll call them unfortunate graduate students, just to work with me for about a week to dump out 3.5 metric tons, so 3,500 kilograms worth of scales onto the ground and painstakingly sort through them one scale at a time. I promise you, in the past 10 or 20 years, I have never smelled something so bad, and I have literally been up to my waist in bat guano in caves looking for crocodiles. It was disgusting. But at the end of this, we were able to resort all of those scales back into bags by species. We were able to weigh them, and we were able to determine that, of the 2,100 kilograms of scales that we were able to sort through, that almost 1,800 kilograms of them were white-bellied pangolins. So white-bellied pangolins seem to make up about 90% of the trade, at least coming out of West Africa. And there's some evidence to suggest that is almost also the case from Central Africa. So how do we go from this now understanding that, we've got 1,800 kilograms of white-bellied penguin scales in front of us? How many penguins does that actually add up to? Well, if we understand the expected scale mass per pangolin species, we can do a conversion. And so previously, there was a lot of research on Asian pangolins, so Sunda pangolin, Chinese pangolin, for example, estimating the scale mass, which they thought was about 360 to 600 grams per individual pangolin. In West Africa and Central Africa, our species are a lot smaller. So it's about a half to a third of that quantity. So about 200 to 315 grams per pangolin for white-bellied and black-bellied. And of course, giant pangolins have a lot more scales. They're about 3.6 kilograms or 3,600 grams per individual. So if we go back to this seizure from Cote d'Ivoire, if we use, for example, the Sunda pangolin expected scale mass to convert the numbers, we find out that about 1,700 or 1,800 kilograms worth of penguin scales is the equivalent of almost 5,000 white-bellied pangolins, almost 600 black-bellied pangolins. And this is what the current conversions are based on. But if we use species-specific conversion parameters, we actually find out that the numbers are almost double. So we've got almost 9,000 white-bellied pangolins in this when we use the actual scale mass of a white-bellied pangolin. I mean, that is a huge underestimation that we previously had. And of course, if we consider some of the major seizures that we've seen around the world recently, so for example, 12 tons instead of 2 tons, the Sunda pangolin conversion parameter estimates some 30,000 pangolin scales. The white-bellied pangolin conversion parameter estimates double that, so 60,000 pangolins in this amount of scales. And in reality, there are of course some giant pangolins thrown in and some black-bellied pangolins thrown in. So it's probably a mixed bag. So what we're looking at actually is around 45,000. We're probably looking around 45,000 pangolins, depending on the actual composition of species that we're seeing, which is like 1.5 times the previous estimate. And so, some work that we've done recently looking at the total number of seizures globally. Since 2009, we have records of around 240 metric tons of scales alone being seized. That works out to around 840,000 pangolins worth of scales seized. I just want to let that sink in for half a second. This is only the illegal trade that we're able to find and take out of the market. There's lots of experts that think that only about 10% of illegally traded products are actually encountered and seized, which means that we're looking at somewhere potentially between 1.7 million pangolins actually removed from the wild, if we think that we got maybe 50% of the illegal trade, to about 8.5 million pangolins if it is actually only 10%. I mean, that's staggering. That's a huge number of pangolins being removed from the wild to fuel this illicit trade, and something has to be done to stop it. So arrests are increasing throughout West and Central Africa in particular. And unfortunately, these are oftentimes Asian nationals, Vietnamese and Chinese, that are leading these trafficking efforts on the ground. When arrests happen, the scales, the local governments oftentimes do a big scale burn like they would for ivory. This is a fantastic public message. But right now, because we know so little about the trade in pangolin scales, we have to ask ourselves, what sort of data and information are we missing out on? I mean, do we know where those scales came from? If we do know where those scales came from, can we potentially pursue legal options to get the countries, the source countries, who are to be more responsible for their pangolin populations? Do we know how many pangolins are coming out of them? Not yet. And so hopefully with a joint effort with the CITES Secretariat, we'll be able to convince countries to hold off for a little bit so we can collect that data before the scales are burned, and we'll be able to work more with a better understanding of the trade. So what sort of options do we have in front of us for pangolin conservation in West and Central Africa? One of the things that differs between pangolins and, for example, elephants or great apes is that pangolins are small-bodied mammals. They can occur anywhere. They're not just in national parks like elephants are these days. And so community-based conservation initiatives are going to be really critical. And science, conservation science initiatives like the work that myself and our graduate students, this is Matthew Asove in Cote d'Ivoire, and Ichu and Daniel are working on, provide a good platform for interacting with local communities. And our community in Cote d'Ivoire, where we work, for example, is a very warm welcome in the beginning, but a bit skeptical. Now, after about a year and a half, people are bringing us live pangolins that they find in the plantation, on the riverside. We take those opportunities to do the science in front of local community members and talk to them about their pangolins and really kind of generate the interest. And in that time, we've seen a reduction in pangolin poaching, not from a high level. This is an area that's not really involved in the commercial trade too much, but to almost zero, which is fantastic. And our main field assistant for this project was the region's #1 pangolin poacher. He's now a pangolin conservationist, which is fantastic. And in Cameroon, the guys from Ichu's group, the Mentor Pop Fellows and Traffic and ZSL, have been really kind of working with World Pangolin Day efforts. Ichu, what have you guys found? How has that been successful, and how have you guys been able to generate enthusiasm in local communities?
Okay, thank you. When we actually started, not much was done on pangolin awareness raising. So since 2016, the World Pangolin Day has provided the opportunity for us to join forces to intensify our efforts to raise awareness about the plight of pangolins. So we actually organize activities both in urban areas and in rural areas. So many organizations have actually come on board, and we are also collaborating with the government, and we have had the support of even diplomatic institutions like the US Embassy to Cameroon, for example. So specifically in the rural areas, we try to combine environmental education and sensitization. So we organize like day-long series of activities, including sport walk, parade, football encounters. So what we have realized is that our efforts are actually helping to raise some awareness, but we are not too sure if this awareness directly translates to a change in behavior, which is actually what we are trying to achieve. So, but we think that more effort still needs to be done, because most of this is done in a particular period of the year. There is need for a kind of more organized awareness raising program for Cameroon or for the region.
Yeah, and so hopefully the more that we're able to kind of engage local communities, the more successful we're going to be in the long run with pangolin conservation. And so with that very positive note, I'm going to wrap up here. I want to, of course, just very quickly thank a lot of the donors and collaborators and sponsors for supporting our work in the field. I'm going to give a very, very shameless pitch to ask you guys to all follow us on social media, reach out to learn more about pangolins. And of course, this is where we're going to be posting results as they become available from the field. And of course, if any of you are interested in donations to any of our efforts, you can link with us on these social media platforms. And before I give this back over to James, one thing that I just want to say is, despite the fact that there's very little information about pangolins in West and Central Africa, one thing that I'm encouraged by is that there are now a ton of people trying to get information and trying to implement conservation programs in this region. And I highly encourage everyone that's listening to this to follow all of these wonderful people in addition to us on social media. Reach out to them, see how you can engage, and see how you can support their and our efforts. And I thank you for listening. Awesome.
Cool. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Ichu. So we're going to just do some quick Q&A. I made a note of a few questions, but folks can ask some more in right now. The most common question that came up, which I'm sure you guys expected, was just sort of curiosity around why it's so easy for poachers to find pangolins, but so hard for researchers and conservationists.
Yeah,
we've talked about this before, but go ahead.
Yeah, I'll take a first stab at that, and then we'll see if the experience is differing a bit in Cameroon and Ghana. But one of the things is that poachers are not afraid to use fairly violent and cruel methods to find pangolins. They will burn out areas of forest and plantations, and as the pangolins are fleeing the fires, they'll catch them as they're coming out. Oftentimes pangolin hunters will stand at the edge of forests that are being felled for agricultural purposes. We don't want to burn a forest and cut down a forest just to find pangolins. These people will use sniffing dogs and hunting dogs to find pangolins in the forest, which can be, if the dog gets the pangolin before the hunter can, the dog can really damage the pangolin. And so that's a bit of a challenge. Working closely with pangolin hunters, of course, is increasing our detection rates. And that's something that we've employed in Côte d'Ivoire. But Ichu, are you guys finding the same thing in Cameroon? What do you think?
Yeah, I think the situation is similar in Cameroon, but in addition to what you said, what I can say is that sometimes the poachers, they use very harsh methods, like you mentioned. In Cameroon, for example, they can create they construct fences and leave small openings to actually channel or small species like the pangolin. So when the pangolin passes through this opening, it gets into their snares. So like conservationists, we cannot do that, but we are also learning from the techniques they are using to find pangolins. So if you, like for example, our camera traps is actually trying to replace their snare traps. So that's why we're trying to have like more pictures of pangolins. So we are learning from them, but there are certain things they do that we cannot do because we care about pangolins.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh,
Daniel, you're on mute.
Still on mute.
Still on mute.
Still on mute, Daniel. Oh, there you go. He's off now.
Okay. Now, I think in Ghana, where I know of a friend who's working with a pangolin hunter, and he has developed something like a trap, but it's able to keep the pangolin alive. We are yet to assess it to know how long can it keep it alive, the stretch level, and all those things. So I think it's something we can look at.
Yeah, yet again, another case of learning from local communities.
Yeah.
Another question from Mary. This one's probably for Daniel and Ichu. Can you guys talk about sort of what is the awareness of the endangerment status for local people in West Africa? And does that factor into their decision to consume it at all? How well known is it that the pangolins are endangered, and how does it factor into local decision making?
Yeah, let me take it. I think generally is low. Generally is low, and in principle, the endangered status of a species should determine how much should be taken. But in reality, that's not what is happening. In Ghana, for instance, the endangered species, the species in Ghana has been classified. So we have Schedule 1, Schedule 2, Schedule 3. So the Schedule 1 species are not to be hunted, which pangolins, all the 3 species of pangolins are within that list. But I tell you, on the roads, you could find people selling pangolins, and nothing is done about it. So I would say that generally it's low. Generally, awareness is very, very low.
Okay, I would say in the case of Cameroon, it's quite similar to what Dan has mentioned. But what I can add to that is that it's not really uniform. It's not all the areas where they actually know about the laws, or they are actually conscious about what is happening in pangolins. In some areas they are aware, in some areas they are not really aware. That's why sometimes even when we conduct our research, we are very conscious to make sure that instead of trying to do the science to conserve pangolins, we shouldn't raise their curiosity, because we may instead lead to a situation where they actually increase demand. For example, when we started in 2017, in our research, we made sure that we were not directly working on pangolins, so the villagers didn't even know that we were directly working on pangolins to raise their curiosity. But as Daniel said, in some areas it is really low, and even when they are conscious about it, it's very difficult for us to tell if they are actually collaborating. But the most important threats that we find for pangolins is like the commercial bushmeat trade, for example, and the international trafficking in pangolin scales, not just the local consumption. Because in some areas, they really resist this local consumption because they say they understand for protecting more charismatic species like elephants, chimpanzees, gorillas. But a pangolin that is very small, they don't understand why they should be protecting a very small species like the pangolin. So in some areas, they are actually, even though they are aware, they actually try to resist pangolin protection. So generally, I think we can really focus on working like nationally or in Central and West Africa. More effort should be put in trying to stop the commercial trade, the rural urban bushmeat trade, because a lot of pangolins is hunted in the local villages and actually taken to major cities. That is the greater problem rather than the local consumption of pangolins by the villagers. So more efforts needs to be put in that direction, in my opinion.
Makes sense. This was a question that came in yesterday, Matt, that we briefly talked about ahead of the call, that I know you're well equipped to answer. But someone yesterday asked if we are unable to really track the numbers and population sizes of pangolins with a large degree of accuracy, how do we actually know they're endangered? So that was something that came up yesterday that I thought I would just, as a good question for your group.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. And I mean, honestly, as we talked about throughout this talk, we don't really know how many pangolins are out there, but we do know the types of habitats they depend on, for example. And so if we're losing those habitats at a rapid rate, like we have in West Africa, Cote d'Ivoire, for example, has lost 98% of its forest cover. If we lose 98% of our forest cover, we don't necessarily lose 98% of all pangolins, but we lose a lot of pangolins. We know that there are tons and tons, 240 plus metric tons of pangolin scales being traded. And those pangolin scales, of course, came from live pangolins. And so we know that that is a reduction in population size, for example. We do know that these animals are persecuted on a daily basis for local consumption and bushmeat, as Ichu and Daniel have said. And so we kind of put together all of these lines of evidence, and we're able to make an assessment. And, for example, we kind of estimated that black-bellied pangolins are less impacted than white-bellied pangolins, even though they're still hunted a lot. And, we know that black-bellied pangolins spend a lot of time in their canopy, in the canopy of the forest, for example, whereas white-bellied pangolins come down to the forest floor very often. And so we kind of estimated that was kind of protecting them a little bit. And so we gave them different status, endangered versus vulnerable. And so, it's kind of a multi-evidence approach. It's not perfect, but it's the best we have for the moment.
Makes sense. Ade asked what your opinion is on insurance populations for the conservation of any species, but just like what are your thoughts on insurance populations?
Yeah, so I mean, my thoughts are that insurance populations can be a very good thing. They provide the opportunity for education and outreach with the public. And if we don't generate support with them amongst the public for conservation of wildlife, we're not going to succeed. They provide opportunities for research and education. And if we ever do get to the stage where the populations in the wild are diminished to the point where we have to consider actually relying on them, then they are there. We can consider increasing production in captivity for reintroduction back from the wild and that sort of thing. And so personally, I think it's a thing that I'm very much in favor of and a fan of. But maybe the local perspective is different. I mean, Ichu, what do you think?
Okay, if I got the question very well, he's talking about ex situ conservation pangolins.
Yeah.
Okay. In my opinion, for ex situ conservation, we have to really be sure about what can be done to ensure that the pangolin population actually survive. For me specifically, I'm more interested in having pangolins in the wild because I imagine they can be difficult to keep out of their natural habitat. So it's best to have them where they can easily survive and where they can contribute to the ecosystem and we can benefit from them.
On the poaching side, do you find that they're pangolin-specific poachers, or is it the same poachers, the same groups that are going after other species in Africa, be it rhinos or elephants, that are also poaching pangolins? How much of it is very like pangolin-specific and expertise-specific on how to track and poach pangolins?
Yeah, I think that really varies heavily depending on where you are in Africa. I think in southern and eastern Africa, where there's one species to go after, or almost only one species, there might be kind of the same species, the same poaching groups, but I'm not 100% sure on that. I mean, Daniel, of course, is the assistant warden of a big national park in West Africa. And what are you finding out there, Daniel? Is it the same people?
Yeah, we have people who are specialized for poaching pangolins, and people who are generalists. When they enter the forest, whatever they find, they kill. But we have people who are specialized for poaching pangolins. Yeah.
Of course, the big issues with pangolins.
And the thing is that the vendors have direct contact with them. So the moment they go for the pangolin, they just connect. And when I was conducting my BS project, I was just talking to one local restaurant, let me say, food vendor. And then she was telling me someone linked with her, and then the person wanted to purchase live pangolins. And that was my first record of it. So I was so there's this, yeah.
Yeah, there's a direct link between the poachers and the people that are selling local consumption. The other thing, I mean, a lot of pangolins in West and Central Africa are taken off through snare trapping. Snare trapping is very indiscriminate, so they're not actually setting pangolins. If they set them right, they'll get a lot of pangolins.
Okay. Yeah, just to add on that, in Cameroon, for example, is very similar to the case of Ghana. But what I want to just highlight is that in Cameroon, sometimes we have like these international traffickers who come in from Asian countries and they settle in some communities. And they are present in their community. They have like middlemen who actually go into the villages and inform them that these international traffickers are around. And when they are around, the prices of pangolin scales, the price goes up. And because of this, it actually sends a lot of people to go to the field actually trying to poach just pangolins, because they know the price for pangolin scales are a bit higher at that point in time.
Well, we are coming up at the top of the hour. For folks that didn't get their questions answered, maybe you'll get matched with one of these guys in the happy hour coming up if they join. So you'll get to ask them then. But I want to, and you also can ask them in the app ongoing. So don't forget, you can log up, you can jump into the session group and ask any questions. I want to thank everybody here, Matt, Ichu, Daniel. Thanks for making this work. Daniel, thanks for finding the connection and finding the location that made this possible too. Yeah, thank you for all the work you guys are doing. Thanks for sharing it. Keep up with all the great work.
Great. Thanks, James. And thanks everybody for listening. Thank you, Ichu and Dan, for joining us. And of course, I will be at the cocktail hour. So happy to link with everyone.
Yeah, so everybody, now go ahead and on the mobile app, you can only access it through the phone on the mobile app. If you haven't downloaded it, just look up Run the World Events in the App Store. It's an iOS or Google Play. You have to enter it from there, and the rest will be self-explanatory. You'll get matched with somebody and stick around as much as you like. All right. Well, thanks everybody. Have a great Friday night for late Friday night for Daniel.
Thank you.
We'll see some folks in the happy hour. All right. Thanks. Bye.